I used to believe my life was perfect. From the outside, anyone would say I had it all: wealth, stability, a devoted husband who looked at me like I was the center of his world. Daniel Warren wasn't just a husband, he was a protector, a man who built his life around keeping me safe, making me feel cherished. But in that careful devotion, in that unwavering protection, there were shackles. They weren't made of iron, nor were they locked with a key. They were woven into the fabric of my existence, so seamlessly that I hadn't even realized I was bound. It started subtly. A hand on my back at social gatherings, guiding me away from conversations he deemed unnecessary. A lingering glance whenever I laughed too loudly, as if cautioning me to stay within my role. At first, I mistook it for love. Maybe it was love, just the kind that smothered rather than embraced. Tonight, we were at the Hawthorne Charity Gala, the kind of event where appearances mattered more than intentions. A sea of elegant dresses and tailored suits, murmured conversations layered with ambition and deception. Daniel's arm was firm around my waist, his fingers just slightly pressing into my hip. A reminder. I was his. I smiled at the appropriate moments, nodded when necessary, played my part to perfection. But a part of me ached for something unscripted, something raw. I didn't know what I was missing, only that I was missing something. Then I saw him. Leon Mercer. I had heard the name whispered before, always in hushed tones, always with the kind of caution reserved for men who commanded fear. He wasn't part of this world of polite society and calculated charm, he was something else entirely. A force of nature dressed in a crisp black suit, his presence darkly magnetic. He noticed me before I even had the chance to look away. And then he smiled. I felt Daniel tense beside me. He had seen him too. The night turned cold in an instant. Leon wasn't alone. He never was. The men around him were sharp-eyed, their postures exuding control. They didn't belong here, and yet they moved through the crowd with the ease of men who knew they owned whatever space they occupied. It happened too quickly for me to stop it. A word, a glance, a provocation. I didn't hear what was said, only the sudden shift in Daniel's stance. He let go of me, stepping forward, his voice tight and controlled as he addressed Leon. I knew that tone, it was the same one he used when he was trying not to lose his temper. Leon tilted his head, amused. And then, just as easily as the tension had risen, it broke. Not with words, not with negotiation. With violence. A fist. A sharp, brutal motion. Daniel staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief before another hit followed, sending him to the ground. Gasps echoed around us, but no one moved to stop it. And I stood there, unmoving. I should have screamed. I should have rushed to him, checked if he was breathing, if he was conscious. But my breath was caught in my throat, my hands cold at my sides. Something inside me twisted, but not with fear. Not entirely. Leon's gaze shifted back to me. He didn't smirk, didn't gloat. He just looked. And I did the unthinkable. I reached into my clutch, pulled out a small card with my number on it, and handed it to him. My fingers brushed against his, just for a second. He didn't hesitate. He took it. Daniel groaned softly from the ground, stirring, his body trying to pull itself together. People were watching, horrified, whispering. A woman near me gasped. I heard someone say his name. I turned to my husband then, finally forcing myself to kneel beside him, my hand resting on his arm. But it was too late. Because the moment had already happened. Daniel woke up disoriented, his fingers twitching against the silk sheets as if his body was still recovering from the impact. The bruising on his cheekbone had darkened overnight, a violent reminder of what had happened. I sat beside him, my hands folded neatly in my lap, waiting for him to speak. For a moment, he didn't. His breathing was heavy, measured, as if piecing together the fractured memories of the night before. When his eyes finally found mine, there was confusion, then anger, then something softer. I remember being hit. His voice was hoarse, laced with frustration. I was protecting you. I reached for his hand, brushing my fingers over his knuckles, careful, controlled. You were. It happened so fast. He exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. Who were they? I hesitated. The lie formed before I could stop it. I don't know. Just some men looking for trouble. Daniel watched me closely. There was something in his eyes, something that flickered between doubt and trust, but he didn't push. He was in pain, his body sore, his pride even more so. That, more than anything, would keep him from questioning me. He wanted to believe I was telling the truth. He needed to. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I had done. About the small, reckless movement of my hand slipping my number into Leon Mercer's fingers. The weight of it pressed against me like a secret coiled in my chest, waiting to strike. My phone buzzed later that evening while Daniel slept, his breathing shallow, his body restless. I stepped into the bathroom, locking the door behind me before glancing at the screen. A number I didn't recognize, but I knew exactly who it was. Leon, you surprise me, Isabel. I stared at the message, my heartbeat quickening. I should have deleted it. I should have blocked the number, erased any trace of this madness. Instead, my fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed. Then erased. Typed again. I don't know why I did it. A pause. Then, Leon, liar. The air felt thin. I swallowed, gripping the phone as if it might ground me. Why did you text me? Leon, because you wanted me to. He wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. I had wanted him to. A knock at the door made me jump. Daniel's voice, rough from sleep. You okay? I hurriedly deleted the messages, forcing my breath to steady before unlocking the door. Daniel stood there, shirtless, his expression shadowed with exhaustion. You've been in there a while. I smiled softly, stepping past him. Just freshening up. He didn't question it. He let me slide past, wrapping an arm around my waist, pulling me close. I love you, he murmured against my hair, pressing a kiss to my temple. You know that, right? The weight of his words settled deep in my bones. I leaned into him, closing my eyes. I know. But I wasn't sure if I still deserved it. The next morning, things shifted. Victoria came over unannounced, her sharp gaze scanning Daniel's injuries before settling on me. She was always perceptive, too much for my liking. You were there, she said casually, sitting across from me at the breakfast table. Tell me exactly what happened. I stirred my coffee, keeping my expression neutral. It was just a mugging. Her lips pressed together, skeptical. Was it? Daniel glanced between us, frowning. Victoria, I'm just saying, it's convenient, she continued, ignoring him. That a group of men we don't know targeted you too at a charity gala of all places. And yet, nothing was taken. No wallets, no jewelry. She tilted her head. It almost seemed personal. Daniel stiffened. I forced a small laugh. You watch too many crime shows. Victoria's eyes didn't waver. Maybe. The conversation shifted, but I knew it wasn't over. She would keep digging. She always did. That night, Leon called. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. I don't do small talk, he said, his voice smooth, controlled. So let's cut to it. Are you regretting it? I exhaled, staring out at the darkened city through the window. I don't know. A pause. Then, quietly, that's not a no. Something inside me twisted. What do you want from me? His chuckle was low, almost amused. Isn't that the real question? I closed my eyes. This was a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. And yet, I didn't hang up. Leon was becoming a problem. Or maybe I was the problem. Days passed, and I should have let it go. I should have deleted his number, should have focused on my husband, on our life, on pretending that the night of the gala had never happened. But it had happened. And Leon Mercer was a shadow I couldn't escape. He didn't text every day. He didn't have to. His presence lingered in the spaces between my thoughts, slipping into my mind when I least expected it. A single message from him could leave my hands trembling, my breath catching in a way that made me feel reckless and alive in the same moment. Daniel had started to notice the shift. He didn't say it outright, but his touches had become more possessive, his questions more careful. He was searching for something in me, some reassurance, but I couldn't give it to him. Because the more he held on, the more I felt the urge to pull away. It was Leon who finally forced me to face the truth. The text came late in the evening, when Daniel had already gone upstairs. I was curled on the couch, my glass of wine untouched, staring at my phone like it might burn me. Leon, meet me. Just 2 words. A demand, not a request. My pulse quickened, and I typed back before I could stop myself. Me, where? A location appeared. A bar on the edge of the city, one I had never been to. I could have ignored it. I could have gone to bed, curled up next to my husband, and pretended that I wasn't already too far gone. But I grabbed my coat instead. The drive there felt surreal. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel, my heart pounding harder with every mile I put between myself and home. I shouldn't have been doing this. It was madness. But madness had already won. Leon was waiting when I arrived, sitting in the back corner of the bar, his posture relaxed, his gaze sharp as he watched me approach. He didn't stand when I sat across from him. He didn't smile. You came, he said simply. I folded my hands in my lap, pretending I wasn't shaken. Why did you ask me here? His head tilted slightly. You already know the answer to that. I swallowed. The air between us was heavy, charged with something unspoken. You don't even know me, I said. I know enough, he interrupted. His eyes didn't waver. I know you didn't flinch when your husband hit the ground. I know you wanted to hand me your number. And I know you've been thinking about me since that night. A chill ran down my spine. He wasn't wrong. I'm married, I whispered, as if that would change anything. His fingers drummed against the table. Are you happy? The question hit harder than I expected. My breath caught, and I looked away. Leon leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now. You tell yourself that Daniel is the safe choice. The right choice. But if that were true, you wouldn't be sitting here with me. I hated how easily he read me. I stood abruptly, my pulse hammering. This was a mistake. Leon didn't stop me. He just leaned back in his seat, watching, waiting. Are you sure? No. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I turned and walked out, shoving through the door into the cold night air, my hands shaking as I reached for my keys. I needed to go home. To Daniel. To my life. But as I drove away, I knew this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. I barely slept that night. The moment I got home, I showered, scrubbing my skin as if I could wash away the scent of the bar, the tension that had settled in my bones. Daniel was already asleep, his breath slow and steady, his body turned away from my side of the bed. I slipped beneath the covers, staring at the ceiling, my mind a storm of questions I couldn't answer. Leon had gotten under my skin in a way that terrified me. He saw things in me I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. He knew I was lying to myself. The worst part? He was right. The next morning, I tried to push it all away. I went through the motions: breakfast, polite conversation, a lingering kiss on Daniel's cheek before he left for work. But something felt different. His gaze had lingered on me longer than usual, as if searching for something, as if sensing the shift. Victoria arrived at noon. I should have known she wouldn't let things go so easily. She walked in without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking against the floor, her sharp eyes scanning me like I was a puzzle she was determined to solve. "You've been acting strange," she said, settling onto the couch. "More than usual." I forced a smile, sitting across from her. "I don't know what you mean." Her lips curved, but there was no amusement in it. "You forget how well I know you, Isabel." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "And I don't believe for a second that what happened at the gala was just a random attack." My fingers curled against my lap. "It was." "Liar." Her voice was soft, almost pitying. "And Daniel is too blinded by his love for you to see it." I exhaled slowly. "What are you trying to say, Victoria?" She tilted her head. "I think you're hiding something. And I think it has to do with Leon Mercer." Her saying his name out loud made my stomach tighten. "I don't know him," I said evenly. Victoria studied me for a long moment before standing. "You can keep pretending, but I'll find out the truth." And when I do, she trailed off, letting the silence fill the space between us. Then, with a small smile, she turned and walked out. My hands were shaking. That evening, Daniel was quiet. Too quiet. His fingers tapped absently against the dinner table, his expression distant. I forced myself to speak. "Something on your mind?" He looked at me then, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Victoria thinks you're lying to me." I swallowed, keeping my expression calm. "And do you believe her?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "No. But I need you to tell me the truth, Isabel." The weight of his words settled between us. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I love you, Daniel." It wasn't an answer. And he knew it. That night, I met Leon again. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. I didn't tell him about Victoria. I didn't tell him about Daniel's questions. But as I sat across from him in the dimly lit corner of another bar, I knew I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't take back. Leon smirked slightly, watching me with amusement. "You keep coming back." I exhaled slowly. "I don't know why." His gaze darkened. "I do. I should have left. I should have walked away before it was too late. But I didn't." Daniel wasn't asleep when I got home. The house was dark except for the dim glow of a single lamp in the living room. He sat on the couch, one hand resting on his knee, the other gripping a glass of whiskey. The ice had melted. He had been waiting. My pulse quickened as I shut the door behind me, carefully placing my keys on the table. "You're up late." He didn't answer at first. Just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he took a sip of his drink and set it down on the coffee table. "Where were you?" The question was expected. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I forced my voice to stay even. "I went out for a drive. I needed some air." Daniel exhaled sharply through his nose, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. "A drive?" He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "That's your excuse?" I stood frozen, every muscle in my body tense. "It's not an excuse. It's the truth." His gaze flickered with something dangerous. "Then why did I see you?" My breath caught. He reached into his pocket and tossed something onto the table between us. A small envelope, unmarked. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, pulling out the contents. Photographs. Of me. Of Leon. In the bar. In the parking lot. The way we stood too close, the way his hand had lingered on my wrist. The way I had let it. A cold wave of panic crashed over me. I looked up at Daniel, my throat tightening. "Who gave these to you?" My voice came out weak, barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" He leaned back, arms crossed over his chest. "How long, Isabel?" I shook my head quickly. "It's not what you think." His eyes flashed. "Not what I think?" "Then explain it to me." "Explain why my wife has been sneaking around with the same man who attacked me that night." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel's hands curled into fists. "Victoria warned me. She told me something was off. I didn't want to believe her. I defended you." He let out a bitter laugh. God, I was such an idiot. Tears burned at the back of my eyes. I swallowed, my voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you." He stared at me for a long time, and something inside him seemed to break. "But you did." The silence stretched, suffocating. I took a step toward him, but he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't even know who you are anymore." His voice was quiet, but the weight of it crushed me. Was any of it real? My chest ached. "Yes," I whispered. "I love you, Daniel." He didn't answer. Just shook his head, stepping back. "I can't do this." Panic flared in my gut. "Please, don't," he cut me off. "Don't what?" His voice cracked. "Don't walk away? Don't leave you?" He ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders tense. "That's what you did, Isabel. You left me the moment you gave him your number." The finality in his voice shattered me. I watched as he grabbed his coat, as he walked toward the door. My mouth opened, but I had no words left. The door closed behind him. And just like that, it was over.